Well, hey, Larry, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited about this episode. Fins are like this mystical, misunderstood, part science, part art kind of thing. And I'm ready to learn more about fins and how they can change a way a board performs. So, first off, you're a phenologist, which I love the name and title. I don't know if you do or not, but what does a phenologist do?
Well, actually, I created the term phenologist in 2015 because
Fantastic.
if you Google phenologist, it's a financial planner.
Oh, right.
And I remember Larry Kane made the comment to a writer of mine in Florida that when Chip Bach was talking to Larry Kane says, "What kind of degree does Larry have?" And Chip laughed at him and says, "Oh, he's 45 years of water time." And so after Chip told me that, I've experienced it before. So I figure, you know what? If people want a title, let me think about a title. So Fin is what I do, and ology describes anything prior to that. So I put the two together, and which is funny because a year and a half later, Future then added a phenology to their website, and so did
Uh,
BMG. So it's interesting to see who follows you because the term was never actually a reality until that point. And people made fun of me for using that term.
That's so funny. So, if we're going to break that term down into like the most distilled, raw kind of form? What would you do then as a phenologist? What would be your goal?
Study of fins and understanding the flow of a fin. A fin has many different variables, and I always tell people, you can change a look, but the only way you can change a look is if you understand the function. Once you understand the function and the elements that the function performs in, then a look is easy.
Mhm. Excellent. All right. Well, one thing I love about your fins is they're very much not this cookie cutter kind of thing you'll see in most packages. Your designs are different. They're colorful, different shapes, unique. And they all seem like they have their very much their own purpose. Um, I try to compare it to music. I feel like they have this like Pink Floyd, Grateful Dead, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Led Zeppelin kind of vibe. And I don't
You,
know if
you're
that
exact. You're
reflects, and I
exactly
feel
right.
like and I think that reflects maybe your personality as well, and maybe your where you live and your passion around it. So I think it's really cool that, like you just said, it kind of lines up that you it actually your life kind of influences what your product is.
Yeah, it's funny because in the forums, when you have a name in the forum and you call yourself your handle, you lose your identity. People don't even know who you are. They just go by your handle.
Right,
So you become your product.
right. So if you're gonna use one group musician to describe kind of your fins, what would it be? Or is
Uh,
it too many?
Good question. I think if you would describe it, it would be probably Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd. Yeah. Yeah,
Pink
it's
Pink Floyd and Phil Collins.
nice. Yeah, I can see that. Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's the first time I got to ask that question. So that's cool. Or let's get in a little bit of the background. I know that you've been making fins for a very long time, since the 70s, I believe. Can you
71.
71? How did you get into making fins and where did this passion come from?
Well, it started actually as a summer job. I worked in a surf shop that was 2 blocks from my house. I just started surfing from belly boarding. I was about 12. And I said, one day I was going to say, I'm going to stand up. And that's what I did. And when a friend of mine that I surfed with said, hey, there's a shop down the street. Well, it so happens that shop was a dry cleaners, that the dry cleaners went out of business. And I didn't know that there was a surf shop yet there. So I went down to the surf shop and I said, hey, you need any help? Yeah, I'm more than happy to sweep, sell wax, do anything like that. And, the guy said, okay, yeah. So he hired me for $1.50 an hour. And that's where it all started.
That's incredible. So when did you start into actually making your own fins, or how did that develop?
Well, kind of my own fins, probably in 82 when I started doing fins for Hoyle Schweitzer for windsurfing.
Hmm.
I was actually the first guy that created the first fiberglass fin adapter to a stock windsurfer. So you could actually make a fiberglass fin, had a plastic molded part that you put 3 roll pins in that actually engaged the fin and held in that mechanism, and you could then put it in a stock windsurfer because all their fins were plastic. So I think my own fin, that would be at 1982.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when did you discover that you kind of had a passion for it? When did you kind of just lock on? You're like, this is really what I love to do.
When I was 14.
When you were 14. Yeah.
And I guess it's because when I was before the surf shop, my dad actually was always into boats. So I actually had a scuba license that I could actually go in the water with scuba gear when I do with the tank, and I clean the barnacles off our boat.
Yeah.
The owner of the dock didn't like when I did other guys' boats because the barnacle guy would get pissed off and says, "Hey, what's that kid taking my job for?" So I could only do my dad's boat. But it was always fascinating to be underwater and be like in a big aquarium and see what was going on. And then once I started surfing, the people that I was around, because the 70s I think was probably a very new turn from the 60s where part of the big innovation set in, so to speak. So they're very unique things. And the people that I were around were a lot of tinkerers.
Mm-hmm.
And, that happened. Then we came into the 80s for windsurfing. And then we came into the 90s. Once we hit the 90s, it started changing because in 89, after the recession with aerospace, a lot of the people started going overseas because if they failed in the 80s, they went overseas and sold out in the 90s. So we always say that's why you kind of see a lot of the crap, because the guys that went to China were the guys that couldn't make it here.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened is that they went there, and then without saying names, it's funny because we'd make the comment that the guy's kind of a slob and everything else and does crappy work. Now you got 450 people that do exactly the same as him. So they got the same personality, the same work ethic. So it's like, no wonder. Because there are some good places overseas that do good work, but in our industry, it's always about the price. So it seems like that seems to be the bare minimum type thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of goes perfectly into a bit about fin basics that I want to touch upon. Fins are often an afterthought. You buy a new board and it feels like all the tension was put on the board. And then here have this cheap fin kind of thing. And then once you realize how much a fin changes the way a board performs, it becomes frustrating that more care wasn't put into something so important. And I did this recently. Anyone's been curious or cocky has tried to paddle a board without a fin. I did this, and yeah, you can really tell the difference right away that like a fin is a huge difference. So let me start with some broad questions, and we can dig deeper about the basics of fins. Like, what's the big picture purpose of a fin?
Well, in stand up, it's completely different than surfing, because
Mm-hmm.
what happens in surfing is that you got the velocity of a wave that pushes you. In a stand up, you got the paddler, so power comes from forward to center.
Mm-hmm.
So in surfing, power comes from the tail. In stand up paddling, power comes from the front. So when people don't understand that simple basic, then that's already one big problem. Two is that in the surfboard world, you have the rail line of the board that's part of your steering mechanism. The higher the volume of the board, the fin becomes even more prevalent. And the problem with the industry is that they're too surf mentality, that they think that they build the board to counteract the fin without realizing that once you make a board stable and you make it more stable, then that's slower. So no matter what you do, is why it's always the light guys, the guys that are real light and small frame, that always do good in positions. And then, but that's like a 10% niche, because the majority of your guys then are running 175 to 195 pounds. You're already overvolumed. I mean, overweight. So,
Mm-hmm.
so just until 2019, the volume to weight issues just become that they're starting to get it, but they got it in an extreme, which I think is a bizarre situation, because guys really, when they really don't like creating anything, they follow. So I find it interesting that when I told Dave Bainey, for example, in 2016 about the Blackfish, it basically came from a Simmons concept, which is a twin fin board in the 60s. And he had a surfboard in 2010 called the Phoenix that was really a good seller. And when I said, you got to make a race board like that. And his answer was, but a race that doesn't look like a race board. And I go, what do you mean? A race board has to look a certain way. And so when the first Blackfish came out, people used to actually call it a tampon on water. But the board was fast.
Yeah.
And because I told Dave, I says, someone copies you, then what happens is it's going to be distinct that they're copying you because your board is so bizarre. And the first company that followed that suit was actually SIC. So SIC was actually a flat bottom V versus Dave was a concave bottom. And then frustration came in, and Dave took a different direction. I think he should have just stayed with the direction and basically knock SIC out. But the SIC then became a pretty mainstream board because of the bottom, the flat bottom versus a concave, because the Blackfish was really an open ocean, out of control type board. That's when the Whiplash came out. I think instead of bringing the Whiplash out, he should have just went to what SIC did, which has had the Blackfish design that's his, and changed the rocker and take the concave out with the V in the tail. Lo and behold, that would have been flat water.
Interesting. So why
So
would go ahead?
go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to kind of go to the next question. Why would someone want a custom fin versus a stock fin? Something that's made by you versus something that just came with their board.
Well, because the problem, that's simple, because most of the guys early on, for example, I would say till 2018, from 2008 to 2018, everyone was running surfboard fins. So they were running just a fin that, without even thinking about it, because, okay, well, how much can we get that fin for? And whatever China offered, that's what they put on their board. So that was what they considered a stock fin. There would be different similarities. For example, Starboard would give you a stock windsurfing fin. Other guys would give you a stock surfboard fin, but at the end of the day, they weren't the right fin. And I'm just as much to blame as they are, because when I first started paddling in 2006, I was using a nose rider fin. And it frustrated the heck out of me with the nose rider fin. And I didn't even like paddling. I said, oh, this is bull crap. I don't like this crap. And then one day I was just sitting on the beach, because after frustrated from prone paddling in, because a 7-mile-an-hour headwind caught me, and I was like, geez, I can't even stand up and get the board back in. I got to get down my knees and prone in. And when I got to the beach, I sat there and I was just staring, and I tend to kind of gaze off and things, and I was thinking about other things, and that spot reminded me of my windsurfing days. And then it hit me. I go, I'm going to try the Ninja, because I knew that the board was going all over the place. And the weed fin for the Ninja, when I came out the Ninja in 84, was to cut through eelgrass, was for tracking. When the windsurfer guy says, oh, that fin will never point, well, it wound up to be a good seller. But in this world, a weed fin, I thought, okay, I'll try my weed fin. Then when I put that on, the board changed literally 50%. It was like, wow, this is a different board. And all of a sudden I started liking it. All of a sudden I could go straight. All of a sudden I could go into headwind. Then what I started doing is okay, I'm going to keep this leading edge angle, and I'm going to make all my fins come off of this leading edge, because this generates reaction. So this is what dictates. That's why it cracks me up when companies say we got weed fins for our stand-up boards. That means they already don't know. Because in a stand-up world, all your fins should look like a weed fin, but not really being a weed fin, because that angle is, because in a stand-up world, that angle gives you tracking and direction, versus a surfboard fin is more upright. It causes your board to be reactive. Now the fin is actually making you go crooked, because it's telling the board, hey, I want to turn. And you're fighting that fin from telling you to want to turn.
Wow.
So it's counterproductive. So in a stand-up world, all the fins are like that. In my world. And it just so happens the benefit is it sheds weeds. But that's the last thing on the list. There are other things on the list. There's surface area, there's release and twist of the flex of the fin, there's foil thickness of the fin, so forth. Because the Ninja, when I first tried it as a windsurfing thickness, which was 7/16 of an inch thick, it felt like slow, and I know that a thinner foil is faster, it took me 3 months to figure out just my core thickness. Because once I got the fin going, went too thin and I lost projection, then I go, okay, I'm under. So you find that point. And I found it interesting because then other companies, they crack me up when you hear companies talk about NACA foil sections and stuff. The only reason that these marketing companies, which came into existence in the 90s, use the term NACA is because they have nothing to go on. And
Mm,
when they give you a tech turn, because older people like to hear techie things,
yeah.
then you're screwed. So as soon as a company tells you our fins are NACA this, NACA that, oh man, just run the other way because that means that company doesn't know shit from Shinola.
Um, so it sounds like over time, all of this has been like a very iterative trial and error process.
Always. It's the way it started ever since I was 13.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say you have the longest amount of experience out of anyone making
Thousands,
fins.
thousands
Yeah,
of hours and over a million fins handmade.
that's
That
incredible. And
was
I love the fins on the ceiling right there too.
that was by 1990. So you
Jeez.
figure in the windsurfing days, we had 16 people working and we did 500 fins a week.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of experience over time.
And that's fiberglass handmade fins. That's not what these guys say when they do thousands of fins. They spit them out on a molding machine.
And what is so they make carbon fiber fins, and are you typically making just fiberglass fins, or what's
I
the
do I
difference?
do offer a carbon fiber fin in my Air Core, which is a unique fin that's for downwinding that I created with Jeremy Riggs in 2012. But in the performance aspect of a fin, the problem with the carbon fin is that it gives you no warning. It has an unpredictable feel,
Hmm.
and it in some cases will actually govern your board. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that if your fin needs to be engaged in a carbon fin that it's stiff from tip to base, as soon as your pressure is released off the fin, that the current flows past the fin, it's gone and the board comes to a stop. And what I mean by that is that when you see people, we call it hippie hopping, when the board goes up and down, or dolphining, whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it.
Yeah, I see that a lot actually.
The reason that happens, and that happens more on a carbon fin, is because all the energy is gone from the fin and then it always starts from zero. Actually, it starts from -0 because then you have to paddle higher cadence to build the energy back in that you lost and then get back up to a planing speed with that same energy, which is why you burn out faster.
Huh. Yeah, it definitely feels like this part science, part art kind of area. It's really cool.
Well, when people talk about cadence, that it always cracks me up that you kill yourself, and then when people get on and ride a fin of mine, I made carbon fins. I even made a carbon fin similar to, actually identical to the dolphin keel that you already rode.
Hmm.
And Jurgert, that's a good friend of mine that also rides for Infinity. He does the 11 city tour. He was using the dolphin keel, the carbon version, because everyone talks about the weight. It always cracks me up about the weight, that they think that that's negative about what, a couple ounces, maybe 8 ounces difference versus a carbon fin. And I always tell people, if you're so concerned about weight, don't have your protein shake and then go to the bathroom, because that's 2.5 pounds before you start the race.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And
But
then
then
other people carry a hydration package, which is 2 liters. That's 5 pounds.
yep, yep, exactly.
So it kills me, all these contradictions, and
Yeah.
they look at one thing. To me, when people talk like that, that means that they have nothing to say and they feel embarrassed, or they want to be the know-it-all. And guys are trying to be impressive in front of the women. But I find the women are actually smarter than the guys because they ask smart questions. The guys are macho.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I can ride a single fin. Oh, I don't need none of that multiple fin stuff. I had a woman drive all the way from Kentucky, brought her 23 wide flying fish board because she was frustrated after she bought the board, that she asked June, which is another rider for Infinity and has been forfeit rider for a long time. She says, "Does that really work?" And he says, "Yeah." She drove all the way from Kentucky out here, spent vacation out here for 2 weeks, paid $600 after spending over 3 grand for a board, and then went back, and now it's her favorite board.
Hmm.
I always tell people, get a board you can't ride, put multiple fins on it in the right position, and now you got a fast board you can ride.
It's fantastic. That's exciting. Well, let's get a little bit more into more the basics. I have some questions here that you'll hear a lot from just from someone else, maybe when you first started doing stand-up paddling. For example, short fins make a board less stable and they negatively impact tracking and they make turns easier, whereas long forward fins make a board more stable, heavier. They're heavier, create better tracking, and but they also make it more difficult to turn. Is that true or false, or what does it look like?
The heaviness is incorrect
Yeah,
because
because
if
they're bigger, so that's why I said they're probably going to be
what
heavier, right?
what you want to say is that it's not the term heavy, it's the term that your board now is uh, rigid or tight, positive, more predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Because people tend to think that if your board actually locks and and you have control, they feel that that's slow because
Mm,
they're so used to being all over the place.
mm-hmm.
And with a small fin, you feel like you're all over the place. But then if you look at your GPS, you don't get from point A to point B any faster.
Yeah, if you look at a Strava track, like recently I have a board that doesn't track that well, and you can definitely see the line on the Strava because just the tracking isn't
And
fantastic.
here's a perfect example. I just started Bodie Van Allen, who's a really popular young gun guy that really strong paddler. And he was riding Black Project fin, for example, the
Mm-hmm.
Tiger fin. When he got my fin and first tried, sizing was about the same depth, but my volume, because I tend to run more volume. I think that Chris Freeman tends to run more narrow cord length, which hence you make less volume, but that's just because of his mindset versus my mindset. But in 6 weeks' time, or maybe a little longer than that, Bodie went almost 1.4 miles an hour faster on the same board in the same conditions just by fin change.
Wow. Yeah. Evidence right there, huh?
And then when Bodie tried the forefin setup at the Long Beach race, the forefin is notoriously known that you can't draft behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So Danny usually would draft Bodie. It was interesting because in this particular race, if you see a picture, you'll see that Bodie's out front, Danny's flagging him to his right because the wake of the forefin, Danny wasn't going to get caught into that. And then it
Mm,
was interesting because after that race, Danny made the comment to Bodie that Bodie had relayed to me that Danny says, wow, I think Larry has probably been onto something because you just proved what he's been saying for all these years. Because I always tried to get Danny to, try the multiple fins because we're both LA guys. And, but Danny's just that type of guy that he can acclimate to a 2x4. So he goes, I don't need that. And there's your typical macho.
mm,
But if you would take and make something faster for the average paddler, that translates to a person of caliber that they're even faster.
right.
So that's what I loved about Bodie, because Bodie, as soon as he understood and we talked, the kid is super smart, that he is very analytical about everything, that the light came on and he goes, this makes sense. What the heck? And then,
Yeah.
and then he wrote, and when he wrote it, it was like, everything you said, Larry, was true. Because when I first met Bodie, I says, how do you like it when Danny passes you? And he goes, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I go, well, I can change that for you. So he gave me his board, and now he's a strong paddler. He'll be the face of forefins, and I think that his innocence being a teenager, because he's not tainted by all the sponsors and by all the macho-ness. He's his own type of guy,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what makes him unique, and that's what makes him a good athlete.
Hmm. And
He,
I'll get into the four fin system in a second here because I know
yeah,
that's something
but
very.
that's the fin situation. So that's that's you're true, but I wouldn't use the term weight. Weight is kind of I would say kind of a bullshit tool, because people understand that, and that's a thing for selling. It always cracks me up when someone says, oh, I spent $160 for this fin, and I go, well, why'd you get it? Oh, because it's light.
Yeah.
Oh, you spent $160 for a fin that's light. Does that help you in any way? you know I've had people that have had six carbon lightweight fins. Once they try one of mine, they'll buy two more and sell all six of their fins
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because you really don't need six. But they go because, but why they get six is because there's no variances. That's another thing that I find that when you get a carbon fin and then there's another one that's a mild change, and then another one that's even just a little different change, all of those fins work identical.
Mm-hmm.
If you take one of my fins, each fin works distinctly different.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another thing that blew Bodie's mind. He says, your fins have distinct differences.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I have six Black Project fins. They all feel the same.
Right. And this actually goes really great into the next topic here about fin shapes. Because I feel like there are so many fin shapes, and I don't actually understand all of them. I know you have so many different types as it is. How can you help me understand the differences in
Well, if you
this?
notice, the fin shapes in what I call the cookie cutters have gotten less. They
Mm-hmm.
all follow the same scenario. And that scenario basically is a slalom windsurf fin. Because I think that what those guys, because both VMG and Black Project are windsurf based, and that's their mentality. I can usually tell the mentality of a company by what their fin shapes look like.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, my shapes are unique because I do that purposely.
Mm-hmm.
So when people look at my fins, there's a uniqueness of it because I told you about the blackfish theory.
Mm-hmm.
So I do the same thing with my fins, but I also do it because there's a water release and there's a flex situation in fiberglass fin. If you have more tip and it hangs a certain way, it releases different. So I look at a fin in three parts. The bottom third section of the fin is your power. The middle third section is your transition. The top third section is your release. A
Mm-hmm.
carbon fin only has one section
Mm.
because it's rigid.
Right. Oh, I
So
see.
that means that the tip to base is a cantilever flex, one position. A fiberglass fin has three because it twists and flexes down by the taper of the foil to the structure of the makeup of the glass. But now it's different than a fiberglass Chinese fin because people will go, oh, your fins are heavy. No, my fin's not that heavy. What it is they compare it to an overseas fin that is dense. The reason that the fins are dense because they're CNC cut and not hand foiled. So the cutter of a CNC can't cut the same type of fabric that I do because it'll tear chunks of the cross pattern weave out of the fin. So
Mm.
what do? They make it dense so they can cut it to get a better finish and to eliminate taking chunks of the fin out. But hence, what that does is it makes the fin rigid, it makes the fin heavy.
Mm.
And when you need a little twang in the fin, then what happens? Because it's so dense, you take the spine of the fin out, and now it doesn't twist, it will laterally bend.
Mm-hmm.
And when it laterally bends, now you decelerate and lose forward projection, which is the same thing that a carbon fin does.
Mm. Okay.
So even though it's fiberglass, if the foil structure is not right, translates to the way that the fin is foiled and made by the machine or the user, then what happens is it's negative. And now it cracks me up because people are starting to say that their overseas fins are handmade. Well, I don't know if I would say jitterbugging a fin after it comes off of a computer and you got seven guys that are handling the fin calling it handmade.
Right.
So, everyone wants to be kind of like what I am, but they do it all differently and it cracks me up.
Yeah.
Because now I see all these things, especially in the stand-up market versus the windsurf market from the 80s versus the surf market from the 70s, that this was never an issue.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there's one thing I'm curious about. I've seen this advertised on other fins before. How does a board shape or volume length affect the fin that you should have? Like I've seen it where it said, well, this fin is good if you have a high volume nose kind of board.
Well, what they're doing is they're telling you another way that The fin for a high volume board is probably bigger than a fin with a low volume board because a low volume board would sit lower in the water, which means that you don't want a larger fin, so you're going to run a smaller fin.
Okay.
If the board has a higher volume, it's going to sit higher in water, so you're going to be underfinned with the small fin, so you need a bigger fin. So
Hmm.
they're giving you a roundabout, tricky way of giving you the used car salesman tactic to sound techie, but really that's all it means.
Okay. Pretty basic then.
Yep.
Does a board shape or the length affect the kind of fin you should be looking for?
Not really. What does affect the fin is two things: tail rocker, well, actually three: tail rocker, volume, and fin box placement of the board.
And that actually is perfect because my next question was the fin box. And the question you hear this like probably one of the first thing you hear is you should place your fin furthest to the tail in a fin box so because it makes the board more stable. I've heard that so much.
That's a surf mentality. That's true to a point, but if you're running a fin of mine that fills up the whole box, it's irrelevant because the whole box is my bottom
Okay,
third section of the fin.
gotcha. US fin box, I'm sure.
So when they and then what cracks me up is when they have an 8-inch box because then they try to talk about weight for long. Sven at Starboard had an
Yeah,
8.
starboard. Yeah.
So it always cracked me up because now when they introduced a 10-inch box, it was like they think that's a new revelation. It's like, oh, okay.
Actually, it's frustrating because I had an issue with that. That would have changed things a lot for me if it was not an eight. But yeah.
Yeah, well, but and that just kind of always baffles me because I remember I talked to Sven one time and I asked him, I says, how do you determine your fin box placement? And he says, oh, we test them every 6 months where we're at. We have a good testing thing. And I go, I can tell you right now where to put it without testing it. It's like, but he didn't want to hear that.
So if I have a traditional fin, like a traditional setup, and I do have space where I can move it around, is that position actually make any difference where I put it
Yes,
in that
it
fin box?
does make a difference. If the back of your box is 20 inches or further forward, you'll move your fin back. If the fin box is at under 20 inches, like say 18 or 15, which most people run their fin boxes, not most, I should say 50% now, because NSP moved their fin box to 24 inches. One Australia's over 20 inches. Uh, Infinity is 15 to 18. Uh,
SIC.
SIC is 15. So when those guys, you would run your fin always forward, never run back.
Okay, that's really opposing information. That's really good to hear.
Because your fin box is already in the wrong place.
Well, okay.
What happens is your fin box is when it's under 20 inches in most stand-up boards because of tail rocker and release from the bottom, your fin dominant, it forces you to run a smaller fin. So there's the other issue why guys run smaller fins. Because their fin box is too far back, they run the smaller fin because the fin box is back, because the shaper is thinking the further back the board tracks better. But then he doesn't understand his own board
Yeah.
because tracking is part of the equation because they know that when you put the fin box too far forward, that it makes the board livelier. Well, then you put a different fin.
Hmm.
Because when your fin is 20 inches further forward, you can run a fin like my Ninja that's 10 and a half inches deep. But because it's fiberglass, it will react like an 8-inch fin, but it'll hold like a 10-inch fin because it's up further forward in relation to the balance of the volume of the board. But when you're back and your tail is then narrower and thinner and you're sitting down, then what happens is now you're fin dominant. So it always cracks me up when guys sell you a fin and they say, oh, this is a great fin to turn buoys.
Yeah, I see that too. Like this is great for buoys. It's good for open ocean. This is good for flat water. This is yeah.
Well, it's not good. It can't be good for open ocean if it's a buoy turning fin, because the first thing I always tell people, you have to be on the board long enough to get to the buoy to make a turn. So, it's like
Yeah.
when you start hearing stuff like that, I just go, oh my God.
Yeah, marketing kind of situation.
It's almost sometimes it's so comical. The weight thing I find comical, the buoy turning I find comical. Either
Yeah.
you know what the fin's going to do or what it does. The fin actually gives you stability for projection, for tracking, and volume aboard to open ocean to flat water. Flat water fins are usually smaller, less surface area because there's no interference. If there's no interference from the elements around you, then you can get away with that if your board is running a moderate volume. So you got the rail line also aiding in a smaller fin. But if your board is higher volume and you're higher on water, that means that you need more fin, more surface area. You can always, depending on tail rocker, you can run a shorter fin, but you need a longer cord length, like the fin that you have, which is the dolphin keel, because that fin is 7 inches deep, 7.5, which is just like any of the Black Project fins or VMG fins, but it's 14 inches long.
Yeah, let me see if I can get a view of what that looks like here. Yeah.
And people, I remember George Constant, the last battle of the paddle for 425 Pro. He says, Larry, I'm going to do the distance race. He goes, what fin should I use? I gave him that fin. He looked at me and said, it's too big. I go, George, I got a carbon fin of that same template. Put that on your board. Don't look at the fin. Go out and paddle. He went out and he did that race. He was running about 12th or 13th. Towards the end, he started catching bumps coming in. He wound up fifth. If he wouldn't have had that fin, he wouldn't have been in the top 10.
Geez, yeah. Another very visual kind of thing you can see with the difference.
Because
Well,
people look at that and they go, it's too big. No, don't look at it. That's what
yeah.
I told Jeremy Riggs. I told Jeremy Riggs that when I did the Air Corps fin, because Jeremy Riggs went down in the situation. He says, I want my board to do this. I want to do that. I went through like 12 different fins with Jeremy. And then finally I said, you know what, Jeremy? I'm going to send you a fin. Don't look at the fin, just put it on the board.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing I did with Peter Cabrina in 1988 with the Thresher fin. I said, Peter, he's riding a traditional, pretty wave oriented fin. I said, I'm going to send you something, Peter. I go, don't look at the fin, put it on your board and try it. And bam, that
Just changed everything, huh?
changed everything.
Well, let's get into something that you do unique and you have definitely a different viewpoint from the modern market per se, and it's the four fin system. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, that actually happened accidentally. And how that happened is that in 2008, a friend of mine that windsurfed with me, he called me up and says, Larry, I got a Ron Houseboard coastal runner that my wife has problems at this place that we paddle, that you have a backwash that comes off the jetty, you have a 45-degree angle head current coming in, and then you got current going out and water coming through the opening where the ships come in. So it's a complete cluster mess.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, can you put a dagger fin on the board? And I go, dagger fin? I go, no, you don't want a dagger fin. And I says, he goes, yeah, I want a fin up front because I'm a windsurfer.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually, when I first put it in, I was too far to the nose. We actually put 3 or 4 fin boxes in that board to find a sweet spot.
Mm.
When I found how I found a sweet spot is that after a couple of months, I told him, I says, so which did your wife like the best? And he says, where it is right now. So I stand there looking at the board again, just staring at the board. And I noticed it had a bunch of marks on the rail. And I go, is that her paddle marks? And he goes, yeah. And then I looked at the fin, I looked at the marks and I went, light came on. Said, that's it. The ventral fin actually is to counteract the power of the paddle pushing you forward. So when you engage the paddle and come back to the point of power, that aligns to the ventral fin to get you forward projection. That's one.
Hmm.
Two is that the ventral fin will allow the board to come up to a rail, but always bring the board back to center and take the rail to rail wobble out, which then relaxes your calves, and your calves aren't getting tight and cramped because of the wobble under your feet. And then third is it helps your board track better. So it's not people go, oh, I don't need that fin up front to track. No. Tracking is the last thing. The first thing is to take the sway of the nose out. Because if your board has a round roll, like your speed board, for example, it's a super fast board, but
Yeah.
it's round at the bottom,
Yeah.
it slips. So when your nose is slipping, then what happens? That engages the nose so that you get forward projection.
Actually, that was really funny to hear you talk about that, about the marks on the front part of the board.
Yep.
Because I have that exactly, some section of marks on each side from my paddle over time hitting it. And so I think that goes with the ventral fin box that you're talking about. And
So
can you explain the ventral fin box? That's for someone might not understand. That's in the center of the board.
no, what happens is the ventral box is, it used to be that I used to custom do it technically 15 inches from the big toe of the rider, because
Okay.
depending on the weight of the rider, where he stands will depend how he displaces the board.
Yeah.
So then when it got to the point that, okay, Larry, well, what are you going to do if you have a guy come to you and you don't know who the rider is? So then,
Right.
so then I figured plus or minus 5 inches.
Yeah.
Because when I designed the ventral fin has an overhang of 4 inches. So that overhang does two things. It releases and causes the fin to rotate, but it also lets the water release between that 20 and 15-inch mark of forward of rider. So
Hmm.
depending on how tall the rider is, how long the reach is, and so forth. The fin is only 2.5 inches deep, but it's 8 to 9 inches long. So surface area again, just like the single fin at the rear, surface area again doesn't need to be depth to give you stability. You need surface area, but how you displace that surface area becomes the key factor. And in that situation, since it's the belly of the board, the bow of the board, then it's more engaged in water. You don't want depth, because depth, I find that as soon as you hit 3 inches, now you're towing seaweed. And what
Hmm.
I find comical is when I see these guys do a dagger or try to copy me and say, oh, we got a ventral fin, and then they put a 4 inch surfboard fin in it.
Right.
Oh, God, you kill me.
So
Because
the placement is going to be for a four fin system. It's going to be in the traditional spot in the back, kind of the back in the middle, and then two in the side and one in the kind of more in the middle of the board. Or what does that look
well,
like?
what happens is that the ventral fin is 20 inches forward of the balance point,
Okay.
not necessarily the center,
Yeah.
because the center isn't always your balance point.
Sure. Okay.
And what happens at the back of the fin, the back, so that's another thing about a ventral. Once you add a ventral, you can relax the rear fin in the single fin world.
Hmm.
Because what people don't understand also is that a rear fin performs multiple tasks. It controls the power of the stroke in front and the paddle that pulls the nose, which means that if you're a strong paddler, you need a bigger rear fin in a single fin mentality.
Hmm.
If you're a light and high cadence paddler and you skim the water, you can go to a smaller fin. So in buying a fin, the first thing in the single fin world, the guys don't even know how they're paddling to what they're buying.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it. And it's also funny what you talked about. My experience with my board is, yeah, my calves will get a workout for sure.
Yes.
And that lined up exactly with what talked about the surface marks kind of on the front of the nose and my calves, because yeah, that totally lines up.
So as soon as
Interesting.
you add a ventral fin, you can relax the rear fin.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
that translates now to the Ravac. Now the twin fins aren't like a surfboard twin fins. The twin fins are reversed. So the flat is on the outside, the foil is on the inside. And how I learned that technique is when Dave Bainey had the Phoenix Surf model in 2011. It was a very stable board, but a lot of people in the Midwest and back east, they wanted a surf shape, but they're not surfing.
Hmm.
So with the unique fin system that I have called ProBox Fin System, it has a patented interchangeable cant option that what you could do is you turn the fins around.
Oh
So I
wow.
would always tell people, if you're surfing, you put the fins in and cant them out, and now the board becomes reactive because
Oh
you got the
wow.
velocity of wave pushing you. If you're touring and you're at a lake, then you reverse the fins. That reverse will change the toe and make the leading edge parallel. Because another thing is that for the first 8 years of stand-up paddling, they would give you three fins, side bites, everything else, and they would toe in the fins, which means you were not towing seaweed, and your board wasn't any stabler. It was looser because you were causing the reaction with all these fins pointing in to react like a surfboard that's having a wave push you.
Wow.
So it cracked me up. It completely like, wow. So what happens is once I learned that with that, I applied that to the back, because a single fin creates a vacuum. So a single fin will cause your tail to stick So that's why another thing you get that
Yeah.
that's the fin pulling the tail down.
Okay. Yeah, you see that a lot where someone's like paddling really hard, and you see this in a lot of sports actually, but in a stand-up paddleboard, you see that a lot of bouncing.
So as soon as you put twins on and reverse them, the outside is straight, so it doesn't affect the release of your rail line.
Hmm.
The inside has the foil coming into the center. It pushes water to the center. The center fin then splits that water, creates a water bump off the tail of the board. So there's a bump that comes off the back of the board like a jet ski, which is why the guy behind you can't draft you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You see so much, yeah, so much
So
draft,
what
so much
happens
water.
is that as soon as you take the same board, you put forefins on it, it's now faster and there's no hopping going on.
Right.
And
Yeah.
why? And that's another thing that cracks me up because if you're hopping, you can't be going faster than if your board is riding up and being pushed forward.
Sure. Yeah, it's wasted motion, right?
So I remember when 2016 425 shaper Jerry tried the forefin setup when I did all their boards. He got on the board. The first 10 minutes, he comes paddling back to me and he says, "Is it my imagination or is my tail being lifted out of the water?" They said, "Nope, it's not your imagination."
Wow.
He felt that in 10 minutes.
Wow. Huh. So, I think the common idea behind someone saying that the system isn't helpful is because
It's because
it,
they don't know, and everyone else has put fins from the first 8 years, 10 years, like surfboard fins in the wrong spot and being reactive and fin fighting. This is another situation I had with another company. I won't say his name, but they would always they would say, "Larry, I like your fins in the back idea, but the front fin has to be to the length of the board." And I go, "No, no, 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 no," because his philosophy was the longer the board, the further forward. And I says, "Nope, because if you move it further forward, what happens is that it's going to be nose dominant, fin dominant. You're going to fight the fin because the fin is going to be part of the engagement and the powers behind it. So now it already your fin becomes part of your negative. You're fighting the fin."
mm-hmm. Hmm.
So what happens is the fin has nothing to do with the length of the board. That never changes because it revolves around the rider.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will say that this kind of system would create more drag, which when visually like, okay, I have a single fin and a four fin. If you have more fins, I should there, there should be more drag. So,
There is more drag, so minor, but not enough that you can feel it, but you actually feel the positive aspect of it
yeah.
because why? Drag is what Mother Nature recognizes. Drag is one depth. If your drag ratios are low and your single fin is tall because you want it for the stability or because the board being higher volume, it's a wash.
Yeah.
And the side fins are not even reacting with water, they're directing water because I had a guy come up to the trade show when I was at Speedboard that was running four fins at the Orlando show. The guy came up to me, took a picture of the board from the nose, looked at the camera, and says, "I can't see the side fins. Where are they at? Let me take another picture." And I says, "Bingo. Why? If you can't see them in your picture, do you think water recognizes that?"
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
So it only matters how reactive your fins are, and that determines by placement and thickness of the fin and height.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
If
even if they did create more drag, if you have all these other factors that are creating a more positive experience, then it would offset that already, anyways.
the fastest fish in water has over 20 fins. The fish that gets preyed on has a single fin. So go figure.
Yeah. So how would someone who's interested in this get that installed? Is it something that you do? Is it something you do yourself? Both?
Well, I do, but I have guys around the world that have done it early on since the pandemic. That's kind of gone by the wayside. But uh, it's if a guy knows how to do resin work or epoxy work, it's an easy install.
Okay. And that's something that's
I
is this
have a
something
form. I have a formula that I'll you. What I have people do is they'll send me their board on a file. I'll
Uh-huh.
look at their tail rocker, I'll look at their width, I'll look at their volume, and then I'll tell them where to put the placement and how far from the rail. And if they follow my placement, never a problem.
And that's something that's basically kind of not permanent, but it's not like a fin box, like a pro box that you've had in boards there. You can remove the fin. It's kind of just like it's going to stay on the board, correct?
That's permanent. Yeah, it's in the board.
Yeah. But no, but the way, like, if you were say if I was going to go do that myself with that work, but that's going to be like basically part of the board at that point. You
Oh
can't
well,
just remove it.
there is another way that I'm just starting to that I'm experimenting with that I actually do that I explained to you. There is a way that we can stick it on the board. I'm actually making fins with the have a plate, and that little fiberglass plate you silicone to your board, and you can try it, and then
Okay.
feel the experience. You can just take a fishing line, run it between the board and the bottom of the plate, and it'll cut through the silicone, come right off.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, there you go. And then if you like it, you can make it, more permanent, I suppose.
And well, not only that, because with the speed board being a hollow board, it gives me opportunity to dial that board in more. And because it's a super fast board, and being that it's buoyant because it's hollow, it reacts different than a foam board. So sometimes reactions are a little different, and you can't just go around making holes in the hollow board.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was gonna say that was like, how would you even do that with a hollow board? It didn't make any sense.
So that's how this operation came up that I actually learned from a friend of mine, Shane, that actually follows my forefins. And he was the one that actually siliconed the fins on the board so he could fine tune his board. And they go, Larry, what do you think? I did this. And I'm going, I like that idea. I'm going to.
Yeah, that's how it happens, right? I feel like all the good ideas are just kind of like out of necessity, and it goes from there.
So guys like that, I find it intriguing and interesting because I learned from them and they take it a whole nother level.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, if someone has a single fin setup and they're not ready to do a four fin setup yet, what kind of fin would you recommend for all round purposes? Let's say it's one of your fins, for example.
An all around fin.
I know it's hard because but
Well, an all-around fin for intermediate person,
yeah,
or even a board that is tippy would be the dolphin keel, the one you have, because you
okay,
have a board that's super tippy and high volume.
yeah,
Now there is a fin called the bat fin that if you have balancing issues, you take the bat fin would be the one for people that have balancing issues.
mm-hmm,
Then as you step down to make your board a little more forgiving in flat water,
mm-hmm,
would be a Spartan because it has a shorter cord length, but because of the unique design, it'll give you this comparable stability to the dolphin keel.
mm-hmm,
Then, as you step down from that, you get into the Stinger. Then you get into the Stealth Ninja, which the Stealth Ninja is unique because it's a derivative of the original Windsurf Ninja, which is kind of interesting because in 2015, people took the larger fins because at that time we were all using larger fins. They chopped the fin down and said, Larry, I made my board go faster. I think if you foil this fin like this, it's going to work really well. And bam, he was right. So that's how we
nice.
determined the depth.
Oh, there you go.
So I find that six, around 6 inches to 7.5 inches seem to be the optimal drag depth.
Okay, all right,
And all my fins, most of 90% of my fins were in that realm
all right. Those are
as
good
far
guidelines.
as far as drag ratio. And you'll see Black Project, VMG also following the same line.
Okay,
They tend to be probably more in the mid sixes to low sevens,
okay.
but their surface area is less.
So where can someone go buy a fin from you, for example?
LAFins.com.
All right. And so if someone's more interested in fins and wants to know even more or reach out to you, get a four fin system set up, where can they follow you or reach out or kind of just
I,
contact about
I'm
you?
on Instagram as LA Fins Larry, and they can private message me on Instagram and feel free to follow me because I use that as a show what goes on daily at the factory, show new colors, new designs. Instagram is kind of my salesman, so to speak. And then there's Facebook, Larry W. Allison or Sub Race Fins on Facebook. And or when you go to lafins.com, you can just my phone number's on there and you can call me, text me.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I love your Instagram because it's so visual. You get to see all the different designs, and I think your personality comes through, and you kind of just see, kind of opens up your world to of really what fins are and what they can be and how they can help, and it's really kind of, yeah, it opens up that door when you can really see that.
Yeah, it's it's funny because being when I was younger, that was the intriguing part. It was the colors and the different designs because of the whole scuba diving and snorkeling and
Okay.
everything else. So it kind of just because I was always that kid that I would take things apart and put them under a microscope and look at them.
Okay.
So I mean, I took fish apart, the gills, the spiders, butterflies, and everything else. So it was, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Actually, was my goal until actually a dog got hit by a car. And when
Oh.
I thought I would pick up the dog and take it to the vet, and it died in my arms, and that was
Oh,
it.
it's
I
heartbreaking.
never wanted to be a vet again. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's difficult. But yeah, you found your path and helping out people in a different way. And thanks for joining me on the podcast, taking the time out today. Like I said, it really opened up my mind about fins and how much they can impact performance. And I know that I have a lot of work to do on my side of finding out what works best for me. And I hope that it kind of helps some other people to understand, what it can really do for you and how much it affects performance.
yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for putting the word out.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Have a good
Thank
one.
you. All right. Bye bye.